Welcome to the Future of Beef Show, produced in partnership with Drovers and Breeder. This is the #1 podcast for progressive ranchers and feeders looking to run smarter, more profitable, next-generation operations. I'm your host, Jim Johnson, from the Brands and Barbed Wire podcast. I'm joined today by Dr. Jessica Sperber, PhD in feedlot nutrition, and Ian Wheel, founder of Breeder, a cattle tech company helping producers raise, track, and trade high-performing cattle.
Today on the Future of Beef Show, we're joined by Ryder Lee, General Manager of the Canadian Cattle Association. Raised on a commercial cow-calf operation, Ryder now helps shape strategy for Canadian beef production at a national level, and has also been my mentor for more than a decade. We discuss the similarities and differences between U.S. and Canadian cattle production, unpack the role of the Canadian Cattle Association, and explore why these differences and dynamics matter to beef producers on both sides of the border.
This episode is sponsored by Corteva Agriscience. When weeds and brush get in the way, you'll find the solution at rangeandpasture.com. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Future of Beef Show. Today we have Ryder Lee with the Canadian Cattle Association. Jessica, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Yeah, what a pleasure it is to have Ryder here with us. We're recording from Nashville today at NCBA, and it's kind of a heartwarming thing for Ryder and I because we started our friendship and mentorship back in 2017 at the Cattle Con in Nashville. So we've come a long way. Ryder Lee is with the Canadian Cattle Association, as Jim said. He has been very, very prevalent within the beef industry over the last couple of decades. We really appreciate all that Ryder does for the Canadian Cattle Association. And today we thought it'd be cool to talk about how cattle feeding and cow-calf production in Canada both mimics and differs from United States. And then also a little bit about the trade relationships, what goes on with cattle movement across the border, and what the Canadian landscape looks like in terms of cattle production. So Ryder, really excited to have you here.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you tell for the folks that may not know who you are or know your background, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure, it's a strange road to end up at a job you didn't know existed. But I did grow up on a cow-calf operation in southern Saskatchewan, just north of Montana, about 20 miles. So we would make border hops when the dollar was right for groceries or beer or whatnot. But it's cattle country there. It's sparsely populated, grass-based, and hard to grow a crop a lot of years, especially through the 80s when I was young. Grew up, and my brother was 6 years older. He went off to university and was coming home, had enough of the city. And so I went to university and did that for a while, got an animal science degree, but about halfway through realized either it's a trip to the bank to go home and get bigger or find a job. And that was a long way down my life to think of. Didn't even know where to start there, that everything had kind of pointed back there. And through the university, they had, your job programs or summer student hiring, and stumbled in there pretty naive, really, and put in a few resumes and got one interview. And that was called Dow AgroSciences at the time. We've been sponsored by their successor in the past. And that led to, I worked for them for 2 summers and then worked for them for 6 years out of school in sales. And worked in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Ontario and Alberta in those summers. So got to see some agriculture across the country, was selling seed to prairie farmers and range and pasture, and then corn and beans in Ontario. So got a good swath of things. But after 6 years, felt like, this isn't probably forever, and there was a posting with the Canadian Cattle Association, Canadian Cattlemen's at the time, and I applied and heard nothing. And the guy who ended up hiring me, John Maswell, he said, I saw your application. I thought, well, that's weird, and I threw it in the bin, and about 6 months later, I hadn't been able to find anybody. I ended up working with him for 10 years in Ottawa, so doing that capital city lobbying type of thing. And then I went back to Saskatchewan. They were looking for somebody I was the CEO of the Provincial Cattle Association for 7 years, and then came back to CCA 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now, to be the general manager. So it was a long road and just kind of piling up experiences and, both location, because it's such a broad types of agriculture across Canada, whether it's, the weather-dependent side of it is a big part of it. It's such a wide geography, but a lot of it is the same struggles, similar to talking Canada, U.S., or across the U.S., some of the product mix might be different or what you can do, but a lot of the challenges are the same. So champion beef cattle producers in Ottawa and beyond, and happy to do it.
Good.
Still is the family business, so it relates.
Yeah, I spent a little time out of school at the Virginia Cattlemen's Association. So what you know about U.S. Cattlemen's Associations and Canadian cattle associations, even provincial or national, or the whole nation, what differences are there? Are there a lot of differences, or are they really pretty similar?
Some of a big difference is funding. In Canada, there's two checkoffs. So one is national, and that's similar to the national checkoff down here, and you can't use that for policy for lobbying. And then there's provincial checkoffs, and that has a little more free reign, and that's what funds CCA to be able to do that lobbying. And that's a big one, that the amount of time, energy, people that goes into finding the money to be able to do the things. And then a lot of it is very similar, though. It's real cattle producers making the decisions on what needs to go get done, and then they have staff to go get it and help them on their way. You're in that leadership role for 2, 4, 6 years. There's a lot of learning that comes from somebody that's been there before and help people figure out who to talk to, where to talk to, how to get things done. That's very similar.
Yeah. Board of directors is kind of governed by board of directors like it is here.
Yeah, it is. And you'd see that state to state and province to province. There's little tweaks that are different. And whether it's terms or what you call the succession plan and things like that. But it's a board that hires a CEO, and they usually are responsible for the staff and answer to the board. And depending on the size of the industry or the direction of that board, you'll have a bigger or smaller staff aimed at different things or the other. And that really is your local flavor of is it more of a cow-calf area? Is it more of a feeder area? Is it both? And how do you balance that? And every state has their tensions between this voice and that voice, and how do you reconcile those, and how does government impact cattle production is different where you're going, whether it's pressure on land and water and development, or is it other things that bubble up as time goes by. Policy developments will come along, and you'll be seized with that for quite a while, and then a decade later, you'll think back, boy, remember when we were really hammering away on that, and something else has taken its place meanwhile.
And how does it work with the other institutions and groups in Canada? Because I know the US and the Australian one, where Australia we have MLA and we have Cattle Australia, and there's sort of policy, trade, research. Where do you fit into that landscape, and what is Canadian Cattle Association's primary role in terms of what you're trying to deliver?
CCA is the policy lobbying focus in Canada, and there's Canada Beef, which does the marketing of beef to consumers. So they're consumer facing. We have the Beef Cattle Research Council that funds and co-funds research. Sometimes it'll be government co-funders, it's industry money. They use producer money to unlock matching funds wherever they can, and really are the home to the research strategy that hopefully doesn't leave things behind, and it's easy to chase the cool thing of the day, whether it was genomics or it's AI or something, but we still need forage research. You still need to think about the whole thing and some of the things that take a long time. So there's the policy advocacy side, that's CCA, and we work with other groups as well. There's the National Cattle Feeders, and there's Canadian Beef Breeds Council, so that's your seed stock groups. So we're not short on groups, but what we work on real well is collaborating. So we do have a Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, brings together the value chain really, and everybody that I say gives a hoot about the sustainability of our industry, and so that's in there as well. And it is a division of, there's some accounting things there, but we're all pretty close together. And
they've been very strong, because I sat on the board for the Global Roundtable for a while, and it was very often Canada we looked to for where some of that sustainability research was coming out of. It's been amazing to see just how forward thinking Canada's been on some of those areas. So, and how you tie it all together.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. It's something that I think goes back to 2006, and Livestock's Long Shadow came out and really illustrated what happens when you're not there, and things get written and positions get taken by global groups like the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and that's really informed a lot of our strategy. And my take on things is if we're not there and leading, somebody is.
Yeah. As a previous guest told us, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So
words to live by.
Yeah. So obviously, if some of our viewers don't recognize the studio today, we're recording from Nashville, Tennessee, at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association CattleCon, so their convention. Does Canada have an annual convention?
We do, and it's not that old. So the Canadian Beef Industry Conference is a little over a decade old, and it was some of the formative parts of it, or the thoughts of it, was, boy, it'd be nice if we had a CattleCon, and it's in August, and it really reflects a lot of the comparative between the U.S. industry and Canada's. It's about 10% of the size. The idea of it also was, boy, we have these groups that I mentioned that generally would have a summer meeting. What if we had them all the same week? You've got some overlapping boards. Your presidents want to generally be at a lot of these things. Could we cut out a few flights and cut out a few hotel rooms and maybe get some synergies by having it all together? It's tough, though. The more you shove into a few days, the more you feel like, well, I wanted to be at these things too. And so I've seen that with CattleCon, seems to be stretching out to have less overlap. But, boy, it gets to be a long haul too. And we're fighting that same thing. So we've went to every other year with the Beef Industry Conference in Canada. This year it's in Winnipeg, and happy for it.
So, Ryder, let's talk about the cattle landscape in Canada. Obviously, it differs from the west to the east. And where do all the cattle lie? What are the numbers? And how do they compare to the U.S.? Generally, we say that the U.S. is about tenfold for Canadian cow-calf and cattle on feed numbers. But let's just dive into that.
Yeah, and that's your best rule of thumb is that 10x part of it, but we're kind of distributed. There's a big lump in that Alberta, Saskatchewan neighborhood where many of the beef cows are, the mother cows are, and we've got kind of two pockets of feeding in southern Ontario where the corn grows, and then in southern Alberta where there's terrific irrigation infrastructure for the feed growing, and then just a sweet pocket of weather as well. and you're seeing that right now. It's warmer in Calgary than in Nashville right now, for gosh sake. So that south of Calgary area has some specific weather patterns that make your winters livable. It's a dry cold, so it's outdoor feeding there. versus Ontario, Southern Ontario, boy, you're in the shadow of the Great Lakes. So the weather that comes off there is ample moisture year round, whether it's big snowfalls as we've seen recently or rain through the year. So your feeding there is undercover just to keep from pounding the heck out of the land. And from there east, it's undercover in Quebec and in the Maritimes as well.
Lots of slatted floor barns, which being an Alberta transplant into Nebraska, I find it super fascinating because from Western Nebraska to Eastern Nebraska, it's almost the exact same as Western Canada to Eastern Canada, like from Alberta to Ontario, in terms of as you move east in Nebraska, you get a lot more rainfall. And then into Iowa, Minnesota area, you have a lot more cattle on slats and under cover because of the rainfall, difficult challenges with mud, etc. Very, very similar feedstuffs to Ontario. Then you go out to Western Nebraska, a lot of cattle on obviously open dirt lots, stocking densities a little bit tighter, very, very similar to Alberta because of the arid landscape. So it's honestly, Alberta cattle feeding to Ontario is very similar just to the state of Nebraska in terms of geography.
Yeah. And it's something that we talk about lots when we come to state cattle meetings, to national meetings down here, is that those numbers, there's more cows in Texas than in Canada. And, it's people are like, oh, really? And Nebraska processes more cattle than Canada does. Our fed cattle processing will be under 3 million this year. So the idea that there's a wall of cattle or anything from Canada gonna impact the U.S. market is not something. It's a very complementary piece here and there, and very important locally on the value chains that it's part of, but not nearly the size to go, woof, it's overwhelming or anything.
Ever wondered if you could be getting more out of your cattle?
Breeder is the first technology company that's able to track and optimize cattle from conception all the way to the rail. This puts the power of data into the hands of the rancher and enables them to improve their profit line quicker than they ever have before.
My decision to partner with Breeder was made largely after seeing a demo where I realized what Breeder's doing is unlike anyone else in our industry. Connecting the data from the packing plant back to the feedlot, the stocker backgrounders, and the cow-calf, even connecting that data to the purebred breeder, will just open the door to improvement at a scale and a speed that we have never seen in this industry before.
I believe Breeder's putting ranchers in the driver's seat. We can make breeding decisions based on large amounts of data very quickly. The calves that are produced, they have a higher cutout value, their ribeyes are more profitable, and it plays back to us.
As I'm out around the country, people are asking me about Breeder, and I always recommend Breeder. It's the tool for the future.
Head to breeder.co and book a demo with the team today.
So, Ryder, how many cows in cow-calf production in Canada?
Just under 3.5 million.
Okay.
Last July numbers. So every January and July they'll do that count. And
are you seeing a similar trend to herd shrinkage and rebuilding? Like, where is it there? Because obviously the US is at the lowest ever in 50 years. Where's Canada sit? Like, how are producers thinking about it up there? Like, is it in a totally different market cycle to the US or very similar?
No, and we're both slaves to the weather is a big part of it, and we've went through a lot of dry years in cattle country. This last year was maybe a good enough to hold steady year, but we've reduced our numbers back to 1980s counts as well, and there's a couple things going on there. One is there enough rain to grow winter feed? There's some grazing there, but not enough to grow extra. Even last year. So our numbers are down. And then the other piece of it too, though, is that grain farmer with 40 head, as grain farms have consolidated and got bigger, and I don't want those cows anymore. And that was a lot of cows across the country, and we're probably not getting those back. We've seen bigger cow operations too, but that cows on the side piece now, it pencils out now, which is nice to be on that side of things. It's been a long time of good times to be a grain farmer. The lifestyle piece or the operational piece or the expertise or even just the fences around things. How many fences have been torn up? And let's make that easier. It's hard to go the other way. So we're at low numbers, and the rebuild will be in different spots than it was when I was little, for sure.
How reliant are you in Canada on the import-export portion of it with live cattle and then the beef side as well?
Very reliant, yeah. Some of it's supply-oriented, but a lot of it's market-oriented. But we export around half of what we produce, either as live cattle or as beef. It's very important. We saw when our market closed during BSE times, you could send a load of cattle to town, and load of cows anyway, for sure, and get a bill instead of a check. So there's a few things there. There's that give and take on supply, and that largely goes north and south on the east side and the west side of the country. It's easier to go north-south than it is to dodge around the Great Lakes through the trees and bush of northern Ontario. So that's where a lot of ours flow. That said, there's quite a great number of feeders that go from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, even Alberta, into that southern Ontario region. And it ebbs and flows of what goes where. So the last several years, we've been net feeder importers into Canada. And the stats for December aren't in, but we'll probably tick over 400,000 net feeder importers last year, depending if you're on the buy or sell side in the U.S., how you feel about that flow. But it wasn't always thus. Before that, we were net exporters. So, and then those cattle some of them will fill Alberta packers, some of them will come back down to, Washington State doesn't probably need 2 packing plants if it wasn't for Alberta-fed cattle. And Hiram, Utah gets a lot as well, and then out in Pennsylvania at Moyer as well.
Yeah, that amazed me when I first moved to the US. Was like, there's packing plants up there that they wouldn't be open if it wasn't for Canadian beef coming across the border.
Right. Yeah, and it's the same with feeders that want to fill their, have their bunks used. It's cow calf that's looking for another buyer to show up. It's all of those things that go both ways depending on what was the weather for the year, who's long on feed and needs a little bit more, or whatever the reality is of the year will dictate some of those flows too, and what do different packing plants want, and what are their flex and needs. And so it's really important there to have that open flow to have those buyers there.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing I found interesting is, like, not all plants. I think some plants in Canada have grading systems, but not all plants have grading systems. And it's like, if you're producing prime cattle, like, it's actually better to send them back to the US in some of these instances. Is that
You mean
true?
a grid?
A grid, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
I was like, we have a good quality grading system.
You have a grading system, but you're not paid on the grid. So, yeah. But it's like, and not always being paid on the grid as much as you are in the US these days.
Yeah, it's so interesting from some of the geographies different in what Ontario plants are looking for versus Alberta plants, or what customers do you have, and buying accordingly, and talking to those packers of why do you do that different there versus there? Well, our customers for that plant are different than our customers for that plant. And so that plant, the look for coming out of there, we sell mostly double A's. So buying to the best spec and paying for it doesn't match with our customer base. And I was like, okay, fine, yeah.
Makes sense.
And what I found is, things generally are done for a reason by those organizations, for sure.
So that's an interesting point that I think we should bring up for the listeners. Between Canada beef and U.S. beef, our yield grade system is the same now since 2018, I believe, or 2019, in that realm. So yield grade 1 through 5, obviously. And then in terms of quality grading, Canada has A would be standard, double A select, triple A choice, and then the primes are similar. So in Canada, though, we feed a lot more continental cross cattle, big, Charolais, Limo, Simmental type cattle. And so in general, Canada right now is about 10 percentage points less for choice and prime combined, just because of obviously the push for quality grading in the United States. And we feed a lot more straight British cattle here. And so it's interesting from that standpoint, but obviously both countries produce high quality beef that is very, very similar in terms of how it's grading. Little less yield grade 4s and 5s in Canada, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of them in the US at the moment. We'll wait to see what happens when corn prices go back up.
Yeah, I've been amazed just living in Virginia. and having experienced sort of the feeder cattle trade when I was at Virginia Cattlemen's at the time. And back then Virginia Cattlemen's was a little different because it would market about 150,000 feeder calves a year in addition to everything else that you're talking about the cattlemen associations do. But how that trade has moved further north, it used to be that Pennsylvania farmer feeder, Ohio farmer feeder back in those days, and now more and more cattle going into that Ontario area from our location. So it's been interesting to see that moving, and then how the demand shifted a little bit for the type of cattle because of it.
Right.
So that's been interesting.
And that's before you talk about beef on dairy, because there's a pretty big cross-border flow on beef on dairy as well, because there's a big dairy industry in Canada at the same time and then we're seeing dairy calves from Wisconsin go up north as well, like across the border. So.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people, they don't realize just how much activity is on the Canada-U.S. border in terms of cattle trade and cattle movement, right? And we did research, just like you were saying, Ryder, about the packing capacity in the Pacific Northwest. For 2 summers during my master's, we did spent a couple of weeks up in Washington doing research. And yeah, every other day was a lot of Canadian cattle filling up the pens at the packing plant. So yeah, there's the trade relationship is important between the two countries in terms of beef.
And some of that went back to packing plants deciding they don't want those long cattle, but there was one in Canada that did, and that started a lot of that beef on dairy flow into Canada, and it's grown from there, and that just speaks to how value chains grow over time. The right relationship or learning how to do things and what the customer wants can roll out over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So is there a bunch of beef on dairy cattle made in Canada?
Well, our dairy supply is very managed to match our population. So it's there, but the scale of our dairy is small. So when you say lots, and I think of the size of dairies
in the US,
dairy country in the U.S., it's not.
You don't get 20,000 head dairies.
No, it's some of the weather probably is limiting on that too, but it's very matched to population growth. So seeing an opportunity in your dairying business doesn't automatically mean you can just go out and buy a bunch of heifers and grow your dairy farm.
Interesting.
There's nothing greater than seeing your cattle grazing on lush green pasture.
Oh yeah, and nothing ruins that view like weeds and brush soaking up all the moisture and nutrients. Regardless of precipitation, we have to take care of our pastures. It doesn't rain grass.
The passion for cattle ranching starts early. So should the protection. Let's keep our pastures in good hands with Corteva Agriscience. To learn more, visit rangeandpasture.com.
Improved cattle feed rations? Check. Reliable domestic sourcing? Check. Maximizing your return on investment? Check. Whole cottonseed checks all the boxes when it comes to beef cattle diets. As an effective source of fat, fiber, and protein, you can build muscle and increase carcass quality with no adverse effects on animal performance. All hat, all cattle. Want to check some more boxes? Track market prices, find suppliers, and more at wholecottonseed.com.
And so now when we start looking forward to like the future and the policy, like what are some of the big challenges you are thinking about from a policy perspective? I mean, I'm sure trade is one of them because that's been a big topic in the last few years between North America. But, labor, I'm sure is probably other issues. What are some of the big things you're thinking about in terms of Canadian policy for the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, you're nailing it right there. There's a couple of them that are where the customer is going to be and who's going to do the work. And trade is so, you can say trade's a big challenge, but trade's a big opportunity. Access to the parts of the world that are growing, both in numbers and wealth. The better that people are doing, the better they might like to make their diet. And we're at the top of that list. So growing that, finding ways to get into markets that are growing, making sure we're competitive into them. So that's, your tariff schedules and everything like that, but also competitive on the growing side. And so, on a national standpoint, are we approving new technologies to keep pace with other countries? on a profit side of things. Our prices are based out of Chicago as well, but we've got to adjust for the exchange rate and the border. But really, we are competing for a similar customer because we have a very similar product. Like Jess said, a lot of our breed, we don't have the heat-tolerant cattle in our mix, but we've got that cold-tolerant side there. So that high-quality grain-fed beef, we are competitors and customers for each other and want to find it. But who's going to do the work is a huge one. And, up until recently, the profitability to draw that next generation has been a challenge. It's been a tough stretch. So, that was part of how Jess and I got connected, was through the Cattle Young Leaders program. Some visionaries in our industry said, we're writing our own future if that joke about child cruelty is leaving the farm to your kid. We need to switch that conversation to building the future leaders and making sure that the industry is attractive to them. And some of the things that are out there are beyond our control, what falls from the sky, of course, but there are things that we can control, or at least can control going after them. And the other side of it is competing with other proteins too. And one of the inflection points in our country was 2015 when government changed and a really environment-focused government came in, and we couldn't even get a meeting with the Minister of Environment to start with. So it wasn't a strong start. But recently, when you go to international events and even things at home, they're using some of our video content and telling the good story that is cattle on the land, that is biodiversity, and all the things that are sharing the land with beef production, not using up the land.
Yeah, and that's why I think Canada did a fantastic job, rather than seeing that as like a negative. So took the challenge and said, radio, well, how do we prove that beef is like good for the environment, good for the land, and good quality protein that people want to eat? And I think that's what I say about the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Help, from my opinion, outside did a very good job of helping coordinate that.
Well, that's great to hear. And, a big part of that has been, taking the time to put the science behind the things that we say. The National Beef Sustainability Assessment, we've done a couple of those. We can point to that. Here's the math, here's the science of the reductions or the improvements that we're doing, and stand it on its feet versus just pounding away and saying, you got to believe us.
Right. And Australia's hitting that same trend now, where it's probably a bit later than what Canada did, but it's starting to become much more environmentally focused over there. But it's interesting when you compare Canada to Australia. Both of them export-dominated markets for beef. Huge amount of it gets exported. Both have therefore put in traceability systems like EIDs from farm of origin, all the way through, because it helped get them into those Asian markets and, other markets around the world as well. And I know there's a lot that goes to Europe from Canada as well on the non-hormone, or probably was. It's dropped off a lot recently. So same as it has in the US. But yeah.
Let's talk about traceability. It's a word that I think a lot of Americans have questions about, especially nowadays. So during BSE, I was quite young. I was in like grade 3. But I remember, maybe we didn't get as much for Christmas that year and things like that because of how hard it was on my parents with how the cattle market went. How critical is traceability to the Canadian Cattle Association and to the country of Canada? And what are the benefits for producers?
Well, like you mentioned with BSC, it was a big part of being able to say to other countries, we've looked and we've found everything that was tied to that animal, and we've tidied it up, and you can be comfortable telling your consumers that it's okay to import Canadian beef again. And the system that we have right now allowed us to do that. There's other countries in the world that have systems that are probably more every step of the way. That, Germany had foot and mouth not that long ago, and they were able to put a box around that very quick. And foot and mouth is the one that keeps people up at night across North America. That kind of disease incursion. We're seeing the effects of a little bug in Mexico and what it's done to the market. And it's not even communicable and doesn't like a cold day. So we've seen that impact. But that ability to do that technical work and get that report to another government's food safety authority or import authority or whoever make the report to the politicians fast is a big part of what traceability delivers.
So what is the requirement in Canada?
Right now, it's tag your calves or tag your animals before you ship them, so that if they're found to have something up with them, they can look at that tag, get in touch with who put that tag in, and figure out where they've been from there.
And is that an EID program?
It is RFID, yeah. And the other side of, the other thing about that is all the pluses that have been tied to those tags, and different groups and different operations have and especially in feed yards have just incorporated them into their software, their management.
Data.
Yeah, data. It's a way to keep track of what's going on, and you'll see some value chains that are using that. So where did those calves come from? Where did they go through? And being
You're looking at one of those.
Being able to source verify. That's right. Yeah, this was not planned. But yeah, that's growing up on that existing and people grabbing a hold of and making other value from it.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's changed from being a traceability to a productivity tool in the last 10 years.
If you choose.
Yeah, if you choose to do it. Yeah, it's optional. No one has to do it. But yeah, but I think it's, when you start thinking about where Canadian beef could be shipped in the next, 10 years, the demands we've seen out of Australia, out of like China and all of those places are really putting high thresholds now on trying to get traceable product in there, which is amazing.
Yeah, and it's there's so many countries, and even within those countries, there's value chains that if you can access that next level of margin, boy, now you're cooking. But the baseline, getting access into those countries is the big step, and then building from there.
Right, for sure.
So, looking into your crystal ball a little bit, what opportunities do you see for Canadian beef producers in the short term and long term? Maybe even if you were to sit down with the eventual next general manager of the Canadian Cattle Association, what do you tell him?
I didn't know you knew I had a crystal ball.
What's the market price tomorrow?
That's part of the fun of working in this business is the product that we have and the success it continues to have. And protein's having a moment, and that's been wonderful to see. But we still have anemia issues, dietary shortages in Canada and the U.S. on things that beef is a very good deliverer of, zinc and iron. We've got people with dietary deficiencies there. So there's lots of room to run even at home, just building that support and that understanding of how young growing babies need this, and spreading that around the world. The math of population growth and wealth growth around the world is a terrific story for continuing to find places for Canadian beef. And I think our ability to adapt technology and science and management things puts us in a good spot. Jess has talked about what UNL did and all the universities across North America that have that extension focus. We've got an infrastructure that doesn't have to apologize to anybody on being able to find new things and do them new ways and compete. So the way the world is found North American beef is the start, and continuing to just go there. There's room for lots more.
There's nothing greater than seeing your cattle grazing on lush green pasture.
Oh yeah, and nothing ruins that view like weeds and brush soaking up all the moisture and nutrients. Regardless of precipitation, we have to take care of our pastures. It doesn't rain grass.
The passion for cattle ranching starts early. So should the protection. Let's keep our pastures in good hands with Corteva Agriscience. To learn more, visit rangeandpasture.com.
Improved cattle feed rations? Check. Reliable domestic sourcing? Check. Maximizing your return on investment? Check. Whole cottonseed checks all the boxes when it comes to beef cattle diets. As an effective source of fat, fiber, and protein, you can build muscle and increase carcass quality with no adverse effects on animal performance. All hat, all cattle. Want to check some more boxes? Track market prices, find suppliers, and more at wholecottonseed.com.
Okay, so Ryder, let's talk about the importance of Canadian Cattle Association being present at CattleCon, which is where we are today, obviously. And then Ryder has come to many Nebraska cattlemen conventions, so statewide presence as well for CCA. Let's talk about that.
Some of the questions we've had today are some of the same conversations that I have with that elected cattle producer that's learning their way around, beyond their local production. And so we try to providers and customers of U.S. cattle and beef make sure that policy decisions that are made, either at state cattle meetings or at the national side, are made in the bright light of day. So some of those things around what Canada's export numbers might be, or just the different conversations that might take place, whether it is around animal health or export development, cattle feeding and cattle sourcing. When we're in the room and something gets developing that might be based on something that ain't so, that's when we take the opportunity to say, well, excuse me, if we could just check up on the basis of what you're having this conversation, and we'll shine that light on that. And if you do that as a stranger in the room, you might not even get recognized to the mic. So we build those relationships with Laura and people at state cattle meetings and people at the national level too, so that they'll ask us and we don't have to fight our way in there. When the big example was when country of origin labeling came in. A lot of that was based on the wall of beef from Canada that was a threat, and at time that in Montana you'll see Canadian truckloads of cattle go through, but they're going to somebody that needs them, and it sure isn't. And the trade case proved it out that we weren't damaging the market; we were supporting it in different pockets. But that happened because by the time it came to Washington, it was already happening. We couldn't show up at local meetings and say, hey, how many do you think are coming down? How many do you think we've got up there? So we have to be there. Dennis Laycraft, who is the executive director of CCA for a little bit yet, says it's better to be able to look to your friends than to look for friends. And that takes time to build those friendships. So that's part of why we're here as well.
I think the other thing which I think all these associations around the world play a role in is like, how do we align on, mismessaging about beef? You've already talked about it, like nutrition and all, like the importance of, anemia is a huge issue around the developing world and what beef can play a role in that. And I think it's interesting. You have to have those friendships to be able to collaborate on the message that you're trying to take out there as well. And what are the benefits of the beef production? I think so critical that you are here talking to people about that.
Well, and you can't take it for granted on Outlook either. The desire for risk and science-based rules governing trade, Canada and the U.S. are at the forefront of that. New Zealand and Australia as well. As exporters, that's not everybody. And so when you've got somebody like Codex, these international trading bodies, the engagement of all of us together is not very many voices. When you've got more protectionist areas such as the EU, they're a big bloc, and sometimes they get a lot of votes. They're not just the EU vote. Yeah. They're all their members voting. So that working together on how are we going to approach this issue or that issue internationally so that beef and cattle can flow based on scientific approvals, product usage, and things like that. Trying to pump our way into the UK and the EU, they're not really customers that are looking to buy North American beef, and that's a disappointment and a good market that we're not in. And luckily there's others around the world that are better shoppers. But that working together piece is also something that isn't a little thing. It takes a lot of work on those multi-country forums to have influence and to counter the influence of a lot of protectionists want to use those forums to keep their borders closed.
Well, we sure appreciate you coming on the show today, and we look forward to seeing you around in the future.
Well, I sure will. I've recorded in Nashville now, so I've got that to brag about.
That's right.
Well, and it's colder than Calgary, which is even more amazing.
That's right.
I'm not taking credit for that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Ryder. We appreciate your outlook on things.
Well, I'm glad to. I enjoy the show, and it's always neat to be able to share. I think there's lots of things that part of why we spend time coming to these events is to shine lights on what really is, and anytime we can do that, I'm glad to.
Stay tuned. It's time for Ian, Jess, and I to go behind the beef. So good recording, Jess. Was that all you expected it to be?
Oh, yeah. Ryder's always impressive. I was very, very fortunate to have him as a formal mentor through the Canadian Cattle Association Young Leaders Program back in 2016, 2017. So our mentorship has really lasted nearly 10 years at this point. But I think Ryder just brings a fresh set of eyes to, beef production in general across Canada and the U.S. And I think it just shows how critical it is to maintain a good, strong relationship between Canada and the U.S. for not only live cattle that transfer across the border, but also for beef that transfers across the border.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting, just the similarities and differences of the two associations, and learning about that's very interesting. I like to see that, and it's a great opportunity here at NCBA that to interview and meet people like that bring a different perspective.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get an Australian next. I don't know, but no, I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of similarities between Canadian and US beef production, but there's a few differences. It's true that the environmental pressures on beef production in Canada from the consumer have been and from government have been very different to what's happened here in the US. And, in the US, it's not as big of an issue now. It's definitely sort of diminished as an issue. Those issues are still definitely present in Europe. They're definitely present in Canada. They're definitely present in Australia. These other countries are dealing with some of those issues. And as America wants to export more beef again, as hopefully the herd rebuilds and we can start to have more for export, these are going to still be issues. And it's important that everyone's collaborating around the world to understand how we deal with that.
Yeah, and I think too, Canada, like we mentioned in the episode, has done a great job of telling beef's positive story and how beef cattle are critical out on a range as upcyclers for high quality protein. And I think that there's a lot to be said about a country that will go to bat for its beef industry, right? And very, very similar to U.S. beef production. So,
but I'd have to say, they definitely go to bat, but they've also innovated, right? So they've said, okay, there is some issues. How do we make it better? How do we improve it? And it's not a case of just defending the current position. It's how do we change to be able to understand and listen at the same time? And I think that's where, if you haven't seen the Canadian Roundtable or Global Roundtable, it's worth having a look, because they've been incredibly progressive on the research part that goes into actually helping methane emission mitigation and stuff like that. So rather than just be, say, defense, it's been a lot of let's innovate.
So. Yeah, even just swath grazing and different things like that, rotational grazing, taking better care of your pastures, all of those kind of things that obviously make a large impact on total emission.
Yeah, no, it's great. And there's not enough cattle in the US to meet demand right now. So, they're a valuable trading partner.
Very valuable.
That's it for this episode of the Future of Beef Show. And a big thank you to our guests for joining us and sharing their experience and insights on this topic. Hit the subscribe button for more great episodes like this one. If you want to dig deeper into what you heard today, head over to futureofbeef.com, where you'll find free resources and helpful links. Don't forget, we'll pick one listener to win this exclusive Future of Beef Yeti Cooler. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and drop us a message for a chance to win. Until next time, keep your boots on the ground and your eyes on the future.